Good morning, glad you're here. We're gonna walk through some information that we think is pertinent to what's going on in courts, and just because that's what I think doesn't mean that's what you think, but that's why we're all here, right? So just we'll walk through that together. So I want to start off by telling you a story. So this was an opportunity for me, one thing, to show you my grandkids. So these are my granddaughters. And I know they're beautiful. They're more beautiful than any other grandkids, but it's the way it works, right? If if you're not a grandparent, you'll understand someday. I tell my kids all the time, I survived you so I could get to the good stuff. But the story really is about the lady here, and the lady in the picture is my 82-year-old stepmom. So a couple of years ago, she gave me a call and she said, "Sandy, I think I want to go get a smartphone." And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to be really fun. She had a flip phone at the time. Another complicating factor for her is she has macular degeneration. So if you know anything about macular degeneration, really right in the middle where we all see, that's what she can't really see. And so what could go wrong, right? 82 years old, always had a flip phone, macular degeneration. Sure, I need another job. Let's go get you a smartphone. So we go get a smartphone, and she starts learning how to use it. And I really wasn't getting all that many calls. It was really surprising to me. But every once in a while, whenever I came over, she would have a little question here and there. And she was figuring it out. It was kind of impressive to me. And after about a couple of months, she said, "Hey, I think I want to get a tablet." And I thought, okay, so here we go again. So let's get a tablet. And I don't know if that mic is causing. No, maybe I just need to stand way out here.
Maybe it's me.
So we go get her a tablet. And she starts learning how to use that as well. And then this past year, she fell, broke a vertebra in her back, and so she was in rehab. I spent a lot of time up there with her, and we were talking. And she does these books, audio books from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has this program for people who are legally blind, so they can get all sorts of books, and she had this little device that she listens to, and she had a USB drive sticking in the side of it, listening to books, these audio books. And I said, "How do you get those books?" And she said, "Well, I started reading, and I got online on their website, and I can find these. I try to get like 10 at a time. And I bring them, and these are her words, I unzipper them." So, you think about unzippering. If you don't think that's funny, then you probably
also
right there with her. So anyway, I unzipper them, and I move them over to the USB drive, and then I can listen to them. And I'm like, "And who taught you to do that?" She said, "Well, I just figured it out. This is an 82-year-old woman with macular degeneration that was just really starting to figure out how to use some technology, and she figures it out." And so the story, first of all, it's super impressive to me that an 82-year-old woman would want to try to figure this out. But the real story behind that is sometimes I think we look at certain segments of the population and we think they don't use technology, or they're not familiar with technology, or they don't want to use technology. And while that may be the case, it's not always an age thing, or it's not always, an income thing or whatever. And so as we think about ways that we can use technology to do what we sort of started calling redefining justice, we have to keep in mind that technology can actually be used for all different segments of the population. So, just to give you, Jamie, you want to introduce yourself? A lot of you know Jamie anyway.
Sure, I'm Jamie Gillespie, and I'm the general manager of our online dispute resolution division at Tyler. So I know I have met many of you in the room, but for those that I haven't, nice to meet you. And if you can't tell, I am from Texas, so Some people tell me I have a slight accent, which I think y'all do. I really don't. But if you can't understand me, just kind of wave your hand and I'll try to spell out whatever it is I'm saying that you can't understand.
So, and lucky for you, we both have a Texas accent. So if we need to, hand out some kind of sheet that says when we say this, we mean this, we can do that. So we're both from Texas. So I'm Sandy Peters, and within Tyler, I'm the general manager of our Encode Court application, which is municipal court based application. And Jamie, as she said, is here with Modria. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of our applications, but we also want to just talk in general about what's going on in courts in general, and see if you find that interesting. So we'll launch off and do that. And I will say too that I don't know if you could tell, but I'm not a spring chicken. I've actually my whole career has been in technology. So, and when I say this out loud, when I'm about to say it out loud, it sounds crazy, but I've actually been working in technology for 40 years now. I started when I was 10, maybe. No, I started in college, got my first job in college. So my whole career has been in technology. That does not make me an expert on what's going on in courts. But one of the challenges of technology is to try to understand as much as you can about whatever it is you're trying to help technology, be used for, and do the best we can to actually make that meaningful. And so I learn a lot from talking to all you guys, because you're the experts on what courts are doing. And when you take somebody who understands technology, you take people who understand courts, hopefully together we can work out solutions that really help people. So one of the questions that I have, and so I like to ask questions and sort of get people to think, rhetorical type questions, is this idea of how do we move from just managing cases to actually have a focus on resolving cases. So when I look at what we've done, and so in 20 years, I've been working here 20 years at Tyler and been around courts, not always working specifically in courts, but we've had our software that long and working around that. We have spent a lot of time trying to make our case management systems work as well as we possibly can. We spend a lot of time on how do we move information through the system? How do we make it easy to get information into the system? How do we make it easy for you to manage large volumes of cases and move them through the system as you need to? How do we help you? Courts are paper generating machines, right? So how do we help you manage the paper that is being generated in your court and digitize that? We have spent a lot of effort in working on case management systems, and that's a good thing. But largely, who benefits from what we've done in case management systems? You guys do, right? The people that are managing the cases are the ones who largely get the benefit. And the question is it time for us to start thinking about other things, and maybe not start, but challenge ourselves even more to think about how do we get to a point where we can use technology to help resolve cases, not just manage them through the process, so that we don't just keep adding to the backlog that's going on in our court systems. So one of the things that I found was pretty interesting about a year ago is I heard a judge talk about really starting to think about customer service. And it's not a term that I had ever really heard in the court space before. People really thinking about customer service. How do we treat people when they walk into the court? Are we treating people equally? Are we really giving equal access to justice in the way that even like signage in your court and things like that? And one of the examples that I found was very interesting, and what she talked about was just I think it was a municipal court, and there's somebody sitting in the back of the room, and one of the attorneys comes walking in and goes and talks to the prosecutor, and they say, "Hey, how you doing? And you want to go to lunch, this afternoon?" And the person that's sitting in the back of the room doesn't have an attorney. And so in their mind, are they thinking, I'm going to get treated the same way as that person that has this attorney that's about to go out to eat with the prosecutor? Just those are things. Now, that's not technology. There's a lot of what I'm throwing out there is not necessarily technology, but I think it's very interesting to start thinking about how do we do that. And even our terminology in the court system, when we talk about defendants and everything else, is it possible that some of that needs to start changing? We need to challenge ourselves to think differently and try to put on a different hat of what does it feel like when somebody walks in or accesses our court. So I think that's one of the interesting things to think about. And when you think about that, then the question comes up, are we really providing equal access to justice? And then the next question, which is really, I'll let Jamie talk about that. The next question really is, can we use technology to help us provide more equal access to justice? Can technology be one of the things? I think the danger that we have sometimes when we look at problems like this is we can say, well, everybody won't access it that way. Well, I understand that, but can we use it as part of the answer? Can technology help be part of the answer as you really start to think about how do you provide equal access to justice? So I'll let Jamie, I'll shut up and let Jamie. We've actually never tag teamed before, and so it's like both of us are used to driving. So it's like you've got two drivers. So if the car feels like it's all over the road, it probably is. So bear with us. We'll work it out.
So one of the things that we hear often when we're talking to different jurisdictions just overall about technology is as we're trying to push some of the work and some of the access onto the litigants or the defendants or whatever we're calling them, is that by doing that, we are now having even more of a access to justice issue because not everyone has the same tools available to them. And this is a study that was recently done by Pew that kind of went through and gave us some interesting data regarding cell phone usage. So you can see here that when you're looking overall at smartphones, really, I mean, you have a large number of people that you're going to hit if you're providing any kind of technology through the court that's going to be delivered to a party through a phone, through whether it's just the regular cell phone or if it's a smartphone that's going to require them to access the internet. And same thing, you have the same, very similar numbers when you're looking at different ethnicities. So it's not like, if we kind of think about it in a bigger picture, we're really seeing that most of the income levels have the same amount of access. Most of the ages do. Last week I was actually in Houston and I was walking from the courthouse back to the hotel, and I was with one of my coworkers, and he mentioned, if we provide something on a cell phone, all the people that are on the streets living in downtown Houston are not going to have access to that. And I said, I challenge you. And I said, but you're going to have to do this because I'm scared. And I said, but as we're walking back to our hotel, why don't you ask the people that are living on the streets if they have a smartphone? And we did. And 100% of the people that we asked that have no home, no access to food, no shelter. I mean, they are living on the streets with shopping carts with all their belongings in them, pull a phone out of their pocket. And not just any phone, but a smartphone. And some of them nicer than the phones that we had, better versions of an iPhone than what we had. So when we think about the people that we're trying to reach, we really need to think a little bit broader. We need to really think about the fact that we are not just this may be one way that we're reaching people, but we really have to think about all the different ways that we can reach the different litigants that we're trying to get a hold of in order to provide them the same level of access that anyone else would have. So I really challenge you to think bigger about it. Don't think that, a certain income level is not going to have an access to something, but really kind of think broad about what are those options that we can provide to make sure that we're reaching the mass amount of people that we can. So, and that kind of goes into this next one, is one tool enough? So in this scenario, when we're talking about phones, is that the only way that we should reach people? Should we only give them one option at the court as of a reminder for, let's say, a hearing? Should it only be through a text message? No, probably not. We should maybe also send out letters to people. Maybe we send emails. If we're trying to give people the ability to pay for their traffic citation or, participate in some kind of activity, should we only give them one option? And really, that's not going to work. I mean, we've got to think about, if someone wants to come in, maybe people really like that face-to-face interaction. And so they want to come to the courthouse and they want to pay their citation that they have in the courthouse. Why would we take that option away? But why would we also take the option away from someone who maybe really wants to do it from their desk at their office when they get to work that morning and be done with it, right? So we can't think about the fact that there's only going to be one option for every litigant to use. We've got to think bigger and really just kind of think about how we can hit the most amount of people available. So this kind of, goes with the same thing, is you really need to make sure that we're going to focus on hitting whatever is most comfortable for that person. So when you're thinking about it, you may even want to do an informal poll, walk around, talk to some of the people that are coming into the courthouse. Hey, what would be the best option for you to do whatever it is that you're trying to do here? And try to get them to give you some ideas of different ways that we can use the technology.
So as an example of that, really, just as a poll here, bear with me, how many of you drink Diet Coke? Coke Zero. Okay. Caffeine-free Coke. Nobody. I don't know why they have that. Okay, one. They got it all for you. They got a whole aisle just for you. So I just remember, again, here's my age. So growing up, I worked in a grocery store in a small little town in Texas, and we called it the Coke aisle, okay, because that's what we call it in Texas. Doesn't matter whether it's Coke or Dr. Pepper or whatever, so
okay.
The soda aisle, whatever we want to call it. And it was like a fourth of an aisle. I mean, it was just, you had Coke, you had Dr. Pepper, you had Sprite, you had 7-Up, and that was almost it. And so there was very few choices. Today, when you walk in a grocery store, it's the whole aisle. And, it's Diet Coke, it's Diet Caffeine-Free Coke, and every one of them that are still in business. Does anybody know if RC Cola is still in business? I was trying to think about that, but I don't know whether, some of them like that, who's just like, no, we're just going to do one thing. Are they even still around? And so you have to provide a lot of different options for people. We're in a world where we have a lot of choices, sometimes maybe too many choices, I don't know, but there's, a lot of us are more comfortable with different types of choices. And isn't it kind of the same way when you sort of think about a communication style? So just like Jamie was talking about, if all we do is send out text notifications, is everybody comfortable with that? If all we do is send out letters, is everybody comfortable with that? So a lot of people have a lot of different communication styles. And so when you think about this whole access to justice and idea about that, when you sort of think about some different ways that we can provide access to the information and also access to an ability to actually go get their case resolved, there's several different things that you can use. So this whole idea of self-service, right? So online, I'm comfortable with getting online, reading what my options are, making a choice, and moving on, especially when we're talking about traffic, right? So I can do that. I'm comfortable with that. Not everyone is comfortable with that. And it's not always, I'm comfortable with communication, so I'm comfortable with that. Sometimes it even is different when we start talking about different types of communication. So for me, how many of you are comfortable, this is really probably a silly question this day and time, getting online and buying something online, right? We do that all the time. I buy all sorts of things online. But if someone said, oh, why don't you buy your next car online? I'm not going to do that. There are people who do, and you can do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not comfortable with that. So it's not always just whether you're comfortable with technology. There's just a lot of different options here. So self-service is one. this idea of automated voice response via phone, I look at that one and go, shoot me in the head if I have to sit here and key in, numbers and do all this stuff. But there's still people who want to do that, and they're comfortable with that. So should we offer that or not offer that? So does it apply to a certain segment of the population? Does it allow us to serve, 3 or 4%? And if we can do it economically, should we try to do that? Email, obviously, again, I've been working in technology a long, long time. I feel like the commercial I know some things because I've seen some things. I've seen a lot in 40 years. And, there was no such thing as email when we first started all of that. And so, but there are a lot of people who now that's really their primary means of communication. That's what their expectations are.
But as an avid online shopper, if you're going to send me something through email, I'm probably not going to get it because I have so many things from all the online places that I shop from that are trying to tell me about a deal. So it's going to get lost in that, message list there. I'm not going to see it. Yeah. And I think just like Jamie's saying, we're all comfortable with different methods, right? And it's not always just a method. It's different methods for different things. Jamie and I use email all day long. I tell people all the time, if I would have known I was going to college to get a degree so I could send email all day long and do conference calls, I might have said, maybe I'm just going to do something else. So that's sort of where our jobs get to sometimes. And so we use email all day long for those types of communication, but other types of communication is not really very effective. So you have to think about that. And so then you think about phone and really, which phone is more of a, real-time person-to-person conversation. Nothing, I just want to call and ask somebody my question. I just want to talk to somebody. And there's plenty of people who are in that category for different types of reasons, different transactions. And then there are times when there are people who, this is one of the interesting things because we have all sorts of software. I find it very interesting in small town America, people still get in their car and drive down to the utility and go to the drive-up window and pay their bill. I'm like, good Lord, we have online bill pay. Come on now, So, but people do, and that's what they're more comfortable with. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Well, I just said, and write a check.
Oh, yeah, and write a check. I can't tell you the last time I wrote a check. So anyway, so the whole thought process there is different things work for different people. And even when you, and really haven't really even talked about it, but when you start talking about alternate payment methods, either doing that online, kiosks, there's a lot of different things. There's, this idea of being able to walk into a 7-Eleven and use cash to pay either your utility bill or maybe a court fine. So different people, different reasons that they have access to different payment methods and things like that. So they're just comfortable with different things. So.
And as we're talking about different types of communications, I think it's really important that we also take a step back and think about just because we come up with a process, that process is not going to be the same for every type of case. And, I'm sure there's very few of you that focus on one case type only, right? Most of you are dealing with maybe small claims and traffic, or you have family and higher civil cases. You're really not going to do the exact same process for a traffic citation as you are for a contested divorce with children, right? They're going to be completely different. And even within that, case type, let's talk about parenting, for example. We may not have the same process within the same type of case. So maybe it is a contested divorce with children, but we're not going to do the exact same process if there's been domestic violence in that case as we would if there wasn't, right? We don't want them at the courthouse together. We don't want them sitting in a room with a mediator together. So there's things that we do that are different just based on the circumstances of those cases. So we really, as we're taking it, case by case or case type by case type and thinking through how do we want to do the communication with these litigants, we need to make sure that we're not trying to come up with one approach that we're going to say, hey, this is the way it's going to work, and it's going to work this way for every single type of case. Because the reality is it just won't happen that way. It won't work. You're going to end up with, all kinds of exceptions. So instead, if you just kind of take it piece by piece and start with one type of case and think through, hey, what are the processes for this case and how can I reach the most people? And then you do that by each type of case. You're going to have much better participation and much better data to start reviewing at that point. And this kind of is just, again, the same thing, but really we've really kind of focused for years about us, right? About what's best for us. But we kind of need to turn the focus over now and start thinking about the people that we are serving. What's the best option for those parties? How can I reach the most amount of people? And how can I give them the access to justice? And, I know right now there's, in many states, the Supreme Court are really looking at access to justice issues and just redefining the civil process. I present a lot, and a lot of times I show a slide that shows a operating room from the early 1900s and then an operating room, currently. And so in the 1900 image, you see a doctor that's there and they have like pitchers of water where they're cleaning instruments, and there's a couple people standing around. They're probably not gowned. And in the one today, there's a doctor that's sitting 10 feet away from the patients looking into a computer and using their hands to, do whatever it is work that they're trying to do on the patient. But when you put those same dates and you put in, a courtroom and you say, okay, what's a courtroom look like in the 1900s versus what does a courtroom look like today? It's the same. And that's because we haven't evolved and we haven't really taken advantage of the technology that's happened over the last 100 years and used that to progress ourselves enough. But if we pulled a doctor out from the 1900s and tried to put them into an operating room today, they would not be able to function. But if you pulled an attorney, put them in, the rules are the same. Oh, I'm echoing now. The rules are the same, and many different types of processes are exactly the same, so they can do that. We're really not evolving the way that we need to evolve. So when you think about just like a typical case, and we talk about this a lot, so not every case follows this, but if you kind of think about a typical non-criminal case, we'll have the case that gets filed, there'll be an answer if things go right, and then we set a hearing, right? So based on some of the National Center's standards, they say it's about 120 days on average, okay? So then you have your hearing, and then maybe there's the order and the case is closed. So 120 days, right? But during that 120 days, what's happening there? So what if we say, hey, why don't you let the parties go in there and start talking back and forth to each other? Maybe they can resolve it just between the two of them. Maybe not. Maybe we have to pull in a mediator to bring in, to help them negotiate, because sometimes the parties don't necessarily know how to negotiate with each other. So if they don't get a settlement, you already have your hearing date. You've done nothing, right? You have lost no time on the case. You haven't increased your backlog. You haven't done anything to the citizens except let them see that there's something happening, that they're not sitting there waiting for that 120 days. But what happens if you actually get a check there and they come to an agreement? Well, what happens is the case comes off of your calendars or your dockets, so now the judges don't have to hear that and they can focus on those more sophisticated, complicated cases. You're reducing the time in which the case is resolved. So now your parties are saying, hey, I went through this process with the local court and it only took me 2 months to get a resolution of my case. How about we exceed the expectations of the people that we serve? That would probably be a little different than what the reality is right now. So you're really kind of in this scenario, you don't have anything to lose. You're just letting them do this participation on their own. And the fact that they can do it on their own time. I mean, ODR is something they can do 24 hours a day. So we don't have to schedule meetings with the parties. So we don't have to say, hey, you've got to take off at this time. This is when you're scheduled. We say, if you want to get online at 2 a.m. and propose a solution, go for it. 2 a.m. might be the time when you are in your best state of mind. Hopefully you have not had too much wine before you are proposing these solutions. But, really, so we're allowing people to work at their best time and do it when it's convenient to them. So, we talk about this. Hey, what kind of actual face-to-face stuff could you do here?
Yeah, so I think what's really, really interesting about Modria is really Modria came about, it had actually nothing to do with the court systems, when it was actually created. It really was about online dispute resolution, true online, I ordered something, it's not what I wanted, or I didn't get the right thing. I mean, a way to sort of get those resolved. And then when you start trying to apply something that was created for a certain industry, and you start thinking about how could that apply to the court system, it's a natural fit for multi-party. That's, and just like what Jamie was talking about, there's a period of time that could be used where things are just sitting still, if people are comfortable with doing it that way. And I think that's interesting. So when you think about how well Modria works in multi-party sort of dispute resolution, what about like this idea of face-to-face communication, which is a fancy word for, a hearing or whatever. So the person is going to come, is going to sit and talk to a judge. And so if you look at our world today, how many of you use one of those services right there? GoToMeeting, Skype, Zoom. We've become very comfortable. Again, I feel like about half of my life is on one of those right now, of some kind, where we're meeting. We meet virtually. Our company is spread out all across the United States. So we have those meetings all the time. So the technology is there. Could we use that technology to help us in the court system? Is there a way that we could use something like that and to really create this idea of virtual hearings? So now we could use one of those services. Zoom is a free service. You can set that up. But when you start thinking about, now I've got to get the right connection out there to the right person. I want to make sure that I don't get two people in that conversation. And one of them shouldn't be. And so I got to have a different session for each one of these people. And it gets a little laborious to try to figure that out and make that work. And so a year ago or so, maybe almost a year ago, we started looking at that and said, really, couldn't we use some of the technology that's out there and create this idea of a virtual hearing? That's a pretty new product. It's very new. We haven't actually released it yet, but we started working on it, and we're going to be ready to release that here by April of this year. And so you guys are welcome to come by and take a sneak peek at that. We have it working in our booth as well as Modria, so we can come and you guys can come and get a demo of that. And it really is just really a way to facilitate an online hearing. So you can have a judge in that conversation, a litigant in that conversation, maybe a court clerk of some kind. And it allows you actually to show information about about real-time information about the case. It allows you to look to trade documents back and forth. Maybe they need to send you a couple of more documents to facilitate what's going on in the case. So it's not just online meeting like we think of with GoToMeeting. It's really a better version of that is really focused on how could we help you do virtual hearings. And again, just like Jamie's talking about, and so sort of when a lot of these we would talk about maybe in a traffic situation and in certain places where people are just going through. In Texas, we always call it the I-35 corridor, where people are just traveling back and forth all the time. They're just in your city long enough to get a ticket. And can you facilitate that and maybe help do some things where today that ticket, if you know how things work in the state of Texas, you're like, well, as long as I don't go back through there and get stopped again, then it doesn't really matter whether it goes to a warrant. Nobody's ever going to know about it. So change that thought process to, you know what? As soon as you get a ticket, the next day you get an email and say, by the way, you can sign up for a virtual docket. The next one is coming up. Here's the date. You can get online. I can do that remotely. When the session, I can send all the information back and forth that I need to. When that session ends, we can take them to a payment place, take care of it. That wasn't me. So, interesting, couple of different options of things that we're trying to do to say, how do we use technology? Some of that technology is already there. How do we use that to help us continue to solve problems in courts?
So really, I mean, technology is changing, right? I mean, we can't ignore this. This is the future, and it's really going to change the justice system and the way that we are looking at our different, the ways that we're going to reach the parties. So we just have to think through all of the different options that we have available to us.
Sorry, Jamie.
Okay.
It's 2020. Where's my flying car? And when you think about, I used to watch Get Smart, and he had a shoe phone, and we thought that was awesome, funny. By the way, you can order a shoe phone where your iPhone fits into it, and that would be really cool. But a lot of things that 20, 30 years ago we thought were impossible, but more and more they are possible, and so really technology continues to change. It accelerates. It's really, again, mind-boggling to think about the changing technology just over my career. And so the real question is, how do we harness that? How do we give courts as many options as possible? And again, I think sometimes what we're guilty of doing is say, not everybody will use that. Only a certain number of people will use that, or only a certain number of people will use that. The real key would be, how do we try to make as many of those options available so that collectively you could serve 25% of the cases that you see, or something like that. And I think that's really the key. So I think the thing that when we start to think about how you access these tools, I think there's some key things that you want to think about as you start to look at what tools are available, how they work, and those sorts of things. So what would be the number one thing you think of when you start thinking about giving people access to tools to use that could real-time update your system? In today's world, security. So how many of you 5 years ago had ever heard the word ransomware? Very few, right? I mean, we had, but very few. And now everybody hears about it. And you think about this idea of ransomware. We, as a company, we've seen things go in the last few years to a handful of those maybe a couple of years ago, to a handful of them in a whole year, to a handful of them a month, to where we are today. Of our customers, we're hearing a handful of them a week. It just keeps accelerating. Security is a huge issue. So it's going to continue to be one of the most important challenges to you. And so you have to really do your homework and try to understand any given tool that you're trying to go implement. What are the security considerations, and how well are they really taking care of the security concerns? So here's another one. When you think about, they only know about, they can only use the tools if they know about them.
Yeah, so for us, we understand the benefits of different tools and the way, what kind of impact this can have on the parties, but they don't understand. So if we're not really providing them access to be able to even find what options that they have. So if there is an available option to pay online, and that's not somewhere that's easy to get to on our website, they have to really kind of dig down 10 levels to be able to see that. Are we being fair? Are we providing that? Same thing with online dispute resolution. If they don't understand why that's going to benefit them, then they're probably not going to take a chance on using it, right? So we really have to make sure that we are providing all that information to the litigants in a way that they understand it. And thinking about the terminology again that we're using, if we're calling this ODR or even online dispute resolution, they don't know what that means. But if we say, hey, here's a way for you and your party to work this out without coming to court, that's something completely different to them than saying, hey, here's ODR. Try this and see if it works. So we really have to think about the way that we're publicizing this, whether we're putting up stuff in the courthouse, whether we have any kind of advertisements on our court websites, whether we even do some kind of media thing with our local news. We really have to get the messages out there because they don't understand enough about the court system, just like what we talked about earlier with the law and order justice. They don't know enough information. They don't live in this world every day. They don't come into the courthouse. They don't know what the lines are like to get through security. They don't understand any of that stuff. So if we're not telling them, hey, these are all the ways that it's going to benefit you, most of the time they're going to say, hey, I'm just going to go and do this same process that worked when I came in here, to dispute a traffic citation 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about is online shopping, and so I'm not the most patient person in the world. So I would just say if I got on a website and I was looking for a specific pair of shoes, a certain brand that I thought I wanted, and after about 5 or 6 clicks, I haven't been able to figure out how to even search for that pair of shoes or put in that I want a certain brand, or if it's not that friendly, what am I going to do? I'm gone. I'm going to somewhere else. I'm not going to stay on there. I don't know that we always think about that in the court system. I don't know that we think about the fact that sometimes we did some research on some of our clients, and you had to be a rocket scientist just to figure out where you got drilled down far enough into the website to actually get to a point where I could actually pay my citation online or make a choice to do something about it. And so it's not enough. The point is, it's not enough to have the tool. You also have to take the responsibility to say, how do we make it easy to use, and how do we make sure that people know it's there and make it easy to find? Those are just as important as actually having the tool itself. So I think one of the things that you also want to think about too, so there's a lot of tools out there that you can use that maybe your system gets updated once a day, or you get the information sent back to you and then you can update the information in the system or pull it in. You just have to think about how important it is to have real-time updates to your system. So an example of that, again, in the municipal court world is someone has a warrant issued for their arrest. If they get online and make a payment and take care of it, you want to try to make sure that system gets updated then. So you don't actually arrest somebody on a warrant that's really not actually there anymore. That's just one example of it. The thing that kind of, when we go back and talk about the first point back on security, this sort of is a two-edged sword a little bit, right? You want to try to make sure that it's updating the information real time, but you got to be really, really careful on the security side. So it's an important aspect of it, but you also got to make sure that it's secure as well. So I think this is one of the things that we've learned a lot over the last couple of years about, and that's the importance of metrics. So this past year, we signed up 5 of our courts across the U.S., so just different sizes, different states, and asked them to go through a kind of a trial with us on how you could use text messaging to notify people about what's going on with their case. Now, text messaging's been around. That's not a new idea. Not trying to say it was a new idea. The theory was, are we using that tool correctly? And so the first thing that we did is we tried to go and do some work so that we could collect metrics back. And some pretty interesting things came out. So interesting that we found across all those 5 courts that the most effective time you could send out a text message and get someone to actually go and click on a link and go do something about it, when would you think that would be? Friday at 2 p.m. Why is that? People get paid. Most people get paid on Friday. That's our theory. I don't know why. We sent out these notifications, the same style of notifications, said the same thing, about those cases. We did it at different intervals. We found the most effective was 2 p.m. on Fridays. They would actually go. We had a much higher incidence of people actually going in and updating their case and doing something about it. So the point is not to sit here and throw all these statistics at you, because 72% of statistics are made up anyway, right? So that's not the point. It's to inundate. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what worked across 5 courts. What matters is what works for you, right? And so you sort of have to take on the role of, if we're going to use these tools, can we put some things in place to measure how effective they are? And are we using them as effectively as we possibly can? So I think that's really the key to the point, right? Is trying to use those as effectively as we possibly can. Okay, I blew through all those. So.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you were at CTC in 2019, so last year at CTC, but this is one of the quotes that Richard Susskind said, and I think it was when he was closing down CTC. He says, by default, cases will be conducted online unless there's a compelling reason to assemble in a courtroom. And I think we really need to think about this. This is in 10 years, this is what we're talking about. And I believe that's true, and it might not even take 10 years to happen. I was talking to a parent that runs some of the city's courtrooms in the town where I live, and during that conversation, he said, hey, we're redoing all of our courtrooms, and we're trying to figure out how many courtrooms to put in. And he said, the judges are thinking we need, I can't remember the number, and he said, I think we need about half that, because it just seems like we need to get away from going to court. And it was really very interesting having that conversation with him, someone who is more on the facilities and the planning side and less actually in the world that we live in every day. But that really is the reality. We don't want to bring people together. We don't want to have large amounts of security at the courthouse. We don't want them to have to stand in the hall and wait and do a cattle call process like what we do. If there's a way that we can get these resolved and we can get them done more effectively and efficiently online, ultimately what we want is to provide justice. So whatever the best option to do that is, that's what we need to be thinking about. So if you believe this in the next 10 years, this is really where we're going, is unless there's a reason they need to be in the courtroom, we're going to be doing a lot of this stuff online. And I mean, if again, just like the informal poll that we did in Houston with the homeless, that these people have access to be able to do this, even if they may not be able to afford a smartphone, or even if they can't, have some kind of video chat mechanism like they do. They will find a way to be able to, operate like this if we allow that, if it's something that we, provide for them. And it may be something that we start seeing our defaults where people aren't even participating in the case because they don't have the means to even get to the courthouse or to do any of that, but they can do something like this. They can do it remote. So this is just something to kind of think about. And what are you doing every day to get us towards an end goal of maybe not having people in the courtroom every day? So really, as we are, looking at what are we going to do for our customers to not only provide better access to justice, but also to reimagine this process and really to kind of bring the judicial system into, the year 2020 that we're in now. What are we going to do to help with this? Are we going to focus on cybersecurity? Is that something that's really important for us? Are we going to make sure that we have real-time updates and that we are, like Sandy said, someone pays for their warrant and then they happen to have really bad luck and get pulled over an hour later? Are we going to make sure that we're not arresting them on a warrant that they just took care of? You know, are we going to provide a better way, a better ease of access for them to be able to go and find on your website how to do the things that they need to do, that we kind of take advantage of the fact that we know it because we live in this world? And what metrics are we going to use to make sure that we are providing the best services to the litigants that we serve every day? So really, those are some things for you to think about as you're kind of going through these different classes and just thinking about what are your goals for next year? What are you going to put in your budget? What technology do you want to see improve?
Yeah, so I think for us, again, we have a couple of things that we're pretty excited about as we start to think about how do you redefine justice? How do we use technology to help you guys as you're solving problems? We'd love to talk to you about that. You guys stop by the booth this afternoon. We'll show you what we have. You know, if you love it, then we'll give you some giveaway. If you don't like it, well, we'll send you on your way. But no, we'd love to come and have conversations about it. And again, you guys are the ones that are solving the problems, right? We understand technology. You guys understand how courts work. Help us figure this out together. I think collaboration is really the way of the future for us to really continue to provide tools that's going to help you solve these problems. So thank you guys. Appreciate you.
Yeah, the exhibit hall
here.
opens at 11, so we'd be happy to talk to you more. You can stay around here, or if you want to go to the exhibit hall and see what we are showing up there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.